everyone. My name is Laura Daly, and I am co-chair of the Roundtable Committee. We thank you for joining us for today's NAC at Home program, Collage and Assemblage with Joan Hall. For those of you not familiar with the National Arts Club, we are a 501c3 nonprofit based in New York City. Our mission is to stimulate, foster, and promote public interest in the arts. To that end, the club offers more than 150 free programs annually to the public. These programs include exhibitions, theatrical, musical, and dance performances, lectures, and readings. For more information about the club, we invite you to visit us at nationalartsclub.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. There will be a Q&A session after this presentation, so I encourage you to use the Q&A function for any questions that you may have. Tonight's program is being recorded and will become available tomorrow on our YouTube channel. Our presenter, Joan Hall, is a pioneer in the field of collage and assemblage illustration. Of her many accomplishments, her work has appeared on many covers, including Time magazine and the New York Times. And her work has been shown in galleries and museums all over the world. Per Milton Glazer's invitation, she created a collage for illustration class, which she has taught at the School of Visual Arts. So please welcome Joan Hall.
Thank you very much, Laura, and welcome everybody who's here and watching. A special welcome to a 9-year-old Canadian artist named Josephine. Okay, so this first collage is George Braque, 1912. So let's all take a trip back. Let's all go back in time to southern France, Avignon. It's August 1912, and George Braque and Picasso were there. They went, Braque went into a hardware store, and he saw this kind of textured paper. As you can see, the wood grain in this piece. So he saw the textured paper, and he thought this would be great in collage. And as the story goes, he did this collage, and he didn't want Picasso to find out about it because he knew if Picasso found out about it, Picasso would copy him. Well, somehow Picasso did find out about it. Next. And Picasso went into the store and bought paper with the caning and the wood grain. And he did these collages. And actually, that's how it came to be known as collage, because in French, the word coller is to paste or to glue, and assemblage is to assemble, which is a three-dimensional collage using objects, mostly found objects. Next.
Joan, I hate to interrupt you, but can you speak up? The sound seems to be very scratchy and fades in and out.
Oh, no. Okay.
So get closer to the...
Okay, I'll get closer. Is that any better? I'm speaking a little louder now.
Yes, that's better. Just, okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay. So here are two collages from the 1800s. Note they're women artists, by the way. But they were pasted paper, and they were done way before the term collage was coined. Next, please. Mary Delaney was a wonderful artist who did cut paper. She called them paper mosaics. And actually, she was 72 years old when she started this, late 1700s. She cut pieces of paper, mostly flowers. And exceptional. I think her work was really beautiful. Next, please. We're going way, 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 way back now to 12th century Japan. And this actually is a collage of pasted layered rice papers that were tinted with vegetable dyes. And the artist did calligraphy over these pasted papers. And what's funny about it is that they were done to illustrate calligraphy. So in a way, it was an illustration medium way back then. Next, please. Russian Orthodox Christian icons. Here you have an example of pieces using beading and gold. Next. The Victorian Blood Book shows engravings that were cut out and pasted into this book and printed somehow. And you see drops of blood. This isn't real blood. But later on in the program, I'm going to show you some pieces with an artist using his own blood. Next, please. How's this sound now, by the way? Is that better?
I can hear you, but there seems to be a lot of like scratchy noises
Oh no, I don't know what that is.
because we were fine just before the show started.
Oh,
Maybe if you just get closer to wherever your mic is.
yeah, well, close as I can be, I think. Okay,
That seems better.
that's better. Okay, good. Um, Victorian hair art was done with the hair of people that were sometimes deceased. It's a bit macabre. They would make these art pieces, rings and brooches, and just in general, framing pieces of art made by woven hair. And this was sometimes placed in the graves of people who had died of their hair. Next. Decoupage is another art, Victorian art, and many people made screens and they cut pictures from different magazines of the time or different advertising art, and they layered them and coated them with shellac and then very, very gently sanded them. Then they put another coat of shellac over that, and that was sanded. And it's more a craft, really, than an art. But decoupage is still done today. Next. Memory ware. It's a folk art that originated in the South, in the United States. And again, on the same subject, these jars that they had done were found in graves of African Americans in the Deep South. What they did is they took objects of these personal objects that these people had, and they made jugs and bowls and various items with these objects of memorabilia. The piece on the right is a contemporary memory ware piece by an artist named Mike Kelly. Next. The Cabinet of Curiosities originated in the 16th century in Europe, and it was a case that the aristocratic houses had and royalty had, where they would have all these different eclectic items, memorabilia. They'd show skulls and they'd present shells and feathers and various things that were personal to them. Next. Power figures in the Congo it wasn't done as art. They were done really to empower the people who created them or people they wanted empowered, designated to certain people. But I think it's more like an assemblage because if you look at it, to me, it's art. And you can see various items that we use. One has nails in it. Who knows what kind of powers they gave that. Next. Another example of collage here, Indian royalty, a piece of fabric is superimposed onto the piece. This is a kind of crash course. I'm going through these very quickly because there's so much to cover in such a short time. And I should say also that this talk is going to be divided in 3 parts. The first part is going to be a little bit about the past and the history of collage and assemblage. And the second part is going to be how it was used in illustration in the 70s. And then the last part is my own work and some of my techniques and some of the ways I've approached collage and assemblage. Next. Well, this kind of depresses me, but it is considered a kind of collage. It's butterfly wing tray. In Brazil, they were doing a lot of things with butterfly wings, and I came across this piece. I would consider it a kind of collage. Next. We're back to Picasso, and here it's still 1912, but you can see the objects he used corrugated cardboard, there was some tin foil, this is his drawing of the Minotaur, and on the left you see cardboard sculpture with string, guitar. Next. Well, it traveled to Spain, here's 1914, and Jean Gris, Spanish artist, incorporated collage from a newspaper with his name spelled. Next. Russian constructivists, the posters were extremely graphic. They were really propaganda posters. And artists like Roshenko, Malevich, Tatlin, they were all part of the constructive movement, which was an avant-garde movement of art for social commentary rather than art for art's sake. So rather than pretty art, they were much more interested in social commentary and politics. Next. Hannah Hawk, she was rebelling against the war and what was happening in Germany, a German artist. And this is one of her collages. And she was one of the early Dada artists. And Dada was an irreverent art form that was the negation of accepted laws of beauty. They wanted to destroy traditional values of art. And the way they got to that name, Richard Halzenberg and Hugo Ball in 1916 just went to a dictionary and they opened it and they just put their finger on any word and they come up with the word Dada, which in this French-German dictionary means hobby horse. In Russian, it's yes, yes. So they thought this is perfect. This is a perfect name for this art movement we're going to do, thumbing our nose at traditional art. And this was starting in Zurich in 1916. Next. Marcel Duchamp was another one of the Dada artists. And he believed that anything could be sculptural, that didn't have to be created by hand and made. It could be an object that already existed if it was pleasing to him. So one day he took a bicycle wheel and inserted it into a stool and spun the wheel. And he decided to call this ready-made, because exactly that's what it was. The one on the right is a wine rack. It didn't do anything to it. It's a ready-made. And it wouldn't be considered really an assemblage, but somehow it fits into this whole movement of found object art. Marcel Duchamp also, no, okay, something else. Next, next. Okay, one of his pieces, and this caused an outrage in a show in New York. He signed it R. Mutt, and it's from 1917, and you can see what it is. It's a urinal turned upside down. And this was one of his ready-mades that he thought, this is sculpture, but it created such an outrage in the art world at that time. Next. Raoul Hausmann was another Dada artist who incorporated collage. Here are two of his pieces. Next. Also Kurt Schwitters. You can see how he incorporated the collage into his painting. And he was also one of these Dada artists, a German artist. Next, he also built this house called the Cathedral of Erotic Misery. I don't know if he lived in it or not, but I find it interesting. It was sculptural and anyway, interesting. Next. So Salvador Dali, he's a Spanish artist, and he was one of the Surrealist art. And the Surrealist movement actually came out of the Dada movement. And it has to do with the irrational juxtaposition of images. But the Surrealists, rather than kind of giving a finger to pretty art, were more interested in tapping the unconscious and dreams. And 1924, a French poet named André Breton started the Dada movement, the Surrealist movement with the manifesto called the Surrealist Manifesto. One day at one of these openings, Dali went to the show, it said, in a diver's suit. He walked in a deep sea diver's suit, which was kind of an expression of surrealism, I guess. Next. Another surrealist, Man Ray, this is a metronome. And this piece actually moves, so it goes back and forth as the eye follows you. Next. René Magritte, you might be familiar with his paintings, but here's one of his collages. And just as a part of the background and texture, he used a music sheet. Next. John Hartfield coined the name photo collage. And all these are anti-fascist, anti-Nazi, anti-war art, which he was known for. And some of them are pretty violent. Next. I love this piece, Merit Oppenheim. This is in the Museum of Modern Art. It's luncheon in fur, and you can see a teacup and a spoon. Completely ridiculous. Next. Matisse was bedridden at that time, and he couldn't do his large paintings. So what he did is he cut out pieces of paper, and he did these. They were small pieces, and eventually they ended up in a book called Jazz. Next. Max Ernst, who you might also know from his paintings, also took engravings from the turn of the century and made books of collage collage using these engravings. So he would cut out these images and juxtapose them and create these collages, which influenced quite a few later artists, including myself. Next. Well, Joseph Cornell is the granddaddy of box constructions. And here's an example of one. And it's Medici Princess. He was a recluse. He lived in Queens in New York. And he lived alone, and he wasn't very social as it goes. But he kind of worshipped actresses. I think he did a memorial box to Hedy Lamarr. But he really established box art. Next. Anne Ryan, an artist in the 50s, was actually a poet. She looked at her collages, which mostly using fabric rather than paper, and she thought they were visual sonnets. Next. The Fluxus movement grew out of the Dada and Surrealist movement in the late 50s. And fluxus means flowing, a Latin word for flowing. And like Dada, it's opposed to conventional art form. So it started really conceptual art. Next. Here's another example of fluxus art, putting together completely irrational things just to create a statement. Next. Louise Nevelson, her sculptures were very large and for the most part kind of monumental, where she'd take wooden pieces and she'd juxtapose them to create a sculpture. Sometimes she used banisters, she used parts of various parts of furniture. Sometimes they were carvings or wood scraps. But somehow when they were put together and painted in one color, which is what she did, black, white, red, they took on a life of their own. Next. Robert Rauschenberg, moving on here, you can see that tire, the circle at the bottom is the inner tube of a tire. And you can get an idea of scale of this piece from the size of that. It's quite a large piece. Also in the Museum of Modern Art, by the way. Next. Bearden was an artist from Harlem, and he recently had a show at the, I think it was the Museum of Modern Art as well. This is one of his pieces. He also did a lot of illustration for jazz albums at the time. And this is one of his pieces using fabric. Next. Well, yes, it's true. 4,800 stamps went into this collage. And it's a pity I don't have a close-up of it, but that's what this is completely made of. Can't believe it, but yes. Next. David Hockney, again known for his paintings, but here is a collage made of Polaroid photos. And what he'd do is he'd take the sky from many, many different angles, and then he'd layer the different Polaroid into making a print out of it. And this was his collage. Incredible. Next. Barton Lidisay Benish. I love Barton. Barton was a dear friend. He's now no longer with us. But he was my next door neighbor as well. And we became very close. And we used to exchange pieces and give each other objects from our own collection. Sometimes he'd ring the bell in the middle of the night needing something, and I might have it. And just a dear friend. But in this piece is currency of different countries. He was kind of famous from his currency pieces. And you can see the paintbrush with the dollar, with George Washington. The government gave him bales of shredded money to use in his art, by the way, a little bit of trivia. Next. So this piece is called Lethal Weapons because it uses Barton's HIV blood. He did pieces, a squirt gun, a corsage that squirts, a poison pen. They all had his blood in it. And to make it even stronger, he'd put them in boxes with the chicken wire cage over the top to give it a sense of foreboding. Well, he became famous in Sweden, not because of his art, but because he had a show there and the pieces were sent to Sweden. And what happened is that they wouldn't let the pieces in because of the tainted blood. So in order to get into the show and the gallery, the pieces had to be sent somewhere to be sterilized. And then they were sent, and it made headlines in Sweden. People were really impressed with, oh my God, who is this artist and his blood? And so he became famous overnight. Next. This still astounds me. I was there. I was with Alita when she did this collage. It was like I was giving her a private lesson. Note the date, by the way, and note the image. It's too much. And to prove it, it's also signed so that you can see on the right side that minaret with the actual date. We were putting pieces, she was putting pieces together, and I was kind of giving my advice or whatever. And that piece in the back is the World Trade Tower, by the way. Next. Okay. Ai Weiwei. This was a show in Milan as a result of his feelings of an earthquake that happened in Sichuan in China in 2008. The government buried it. The government really concealed a lot of it because it's about 5,219 lives were lost, mostly children, students. And one of the mothers said she lived happily for 7 years in this world. The letters are spelling out that sentence, and they're made up of 9,000 backpacks. So this is the installation. And in a sense, it's an assemblage, wouldn't you say? So, next. Elinatsui is from Ghana. And these are made, it's a curtain, it's huge. And it's made from individual bottle tops. Next. Here's a close-up of the weavings of the tops of bottles. Next. This is an artist from Kenya, and she's a contemporary artist, collage. Next. You might know of Barbara Kruger, another female collage artist who uses words in her pieces. Next. Well, remember back there we were talking about memory wear? Well, here's a contemporary piece that I would call memory wear, and this is Marilyn Monroe. Next. Street art of Haiti. For a while, there was a fashion in taking garbage and making art out of many different kinds of garbage that they would find. So here's one example. Next. This is one of my favorites. Again, it's just a pile of garbage, but it's lit in such a way so that the shadow is casting a realistic images, and you see the man with a cigarette and the woman with a wine glass. Next. Okay, so now we're getting into collage illustration. And people say sometimes to me, oh, well, collage illustration, that's not art, is it? I mean, my feeling is that all illustration is art. It's all creative work. And it just depends. The difference between illustration and fine art, really, to me, is whose problem are you solving, yours or theirs? Next. So David Singer's political statement, Ronald Reagan. Next. Janet Willey's an English artist, and she, this is in the 70s, and she used airbrush in her piece. And at the time, airbrush was very popular as a medium. But here she's collaged over the airbrush. Next. Oh, I love this person's work, this guy's work, literally, because what he did is he cut out different pieces from photos and put them all together in illustration. And to me, they present much more of an attitude than would be possible if you were just using an ordinary photograph. So he really gets a point across of the expressions of these people. But that's not the only reason. At this time, people were going up in arms about copyright laws. And so one of the ways to get around not being sued for using images and not copyright images was to take these different pieces and to juxtapose them. So it was clever in that way, but I just love it as art. Next. Again, the same thing. In cut pieces of paper, you can just see what a wonderful expression and attitude. Next. So Stephen was asked by Time magazine to do a piece about Nancy Reagan. Is she that bad? And he submitted this. And of course, as you would guess, it was rejected because it was just too far out. Next. So this is what he did, and this is what was accepted. Still a little far out. Next. This artist got a campaign for this gin, and it was a huge campaign that was in many billboards and magazines, very much in a similar style as Stephen Kleiniger. Well, Stephen was none too happy about that. Next. So this is what he did to Mr. Jenkins, who was the mascot for the gin. This piece was published in the Village Voice. Next. Here's an example of early Photoshop, and I have to include Photoshop because, of course, it's layered and it's considered collage as well. Next. Here's another example of a Photoshop collage. Now, when I started collage in the 70s, I was creating surrealistic images to try to make ridiculous pictures that look realistic. And the way I'd have to do it is cut and paste. And I actually used a magic marker, a permanent color pen, to disguise the cut lines from the white lines that would show when I cut out the paper, would show up in photographs. So to make it look realistic, I actually disguised cut lines. Now, in Photoshop, you don't have to do any of that. Next. And here's some of my own work, and I'm going to show you some of my own collage work. I kind of retired. I was teaching at the School of Visual Arts for a while and continuing ed. And I retired and spent much more time on my own artwork. But this is not showing my own fine artwork, which I'm doing now. This is my illustration. So, next. The Society of Publication Designers asked me to do a poster for their show. And I had to show the tools of the trade. So I found the ruler and the right angle and the different objects that symbolize art. And I used Letraset for her hair. Next. Tokyo Bay Lala Park is the largest shopping mall in Japan. And they asked me to do billboards and advertising for their 10th anniversary fair. And they had two requirements. One is that I had to have a Caucasian blonde, and the other is that it had to show cherry blossoms because it was the spring. So this is what I decided to do. And those flying saucers are actually photographs from an ad for fluorescent light fixtures. Next. They also asked me to do the autumn fair for them, and this is what I did. And I found that deco photograph of a sculpture, which to me looked just beautiful, and so I used that. And some people said, well, did you really cut out all those pieces? I mean, what about those stems? Well, I didn't cut the stems, I drew them in. Next. A commission for Der Spiegel on children's education and the function of learning. And again, here I took many, many items and juxtaposed them coming out of this little girl's head. Next. A commission for Tortilla Flax restaurant in the West Village. They wanted me to do a 5-foot collage for their wall. And I had a problem. I didn't know how to approach it because to do a collage background and glue it, I didn't think technically I could. So I hired someone to airbrush masonite, and that's how the background was done. And then I got calendars and large posters and cut those in order to make the collage on that scale. And it's Tex-Mex. Next. again, look at the this 1991, and there's that plane flying through those buildings. I think there must be a collective unconscious somewhere, but I don't know. But anyway, here you have um, just modern age and technology coming into China. This was the theme. And so I did use Photoshop in this because even though I did most of my pieces by hand, I did scan this in and use Photoshop in order to highlight the CD. Next, New York Times home section. This was on the primal urge to embellish on decorating. And I used engravings very much like I showed you before with Max Ernst in those books. These are early engravings. Next. So I was commissioned by Time to do the Carter presidency, 1980, the cover. And I didn't really know how to approach it because they wanted me to use so many items. I had to get in so many subjects and cover the presidency in one piece. So I thought, okay, let me think, let me approach this. Let me think, what do I feel about Jimmy Carter? I mean, he's kind of down home. I had the little peanuts on the bottom, his family, the Bible. And I thought, I'll put it in a kind of dollhouse setting with compartments. And this would give me a way to show all of these different pieces without it being so organic that they would swim all over the page and look terrible. So this is a graphic way of presenting the piece. Next. I was also asked to do this on the neglect of people in nursing homes at old age. And they turned this one down because they said it was so depressing and they didn't want it to be depressing. But it's about neglect of people, old age in nursing homes. It's depressing. But anyway, I rented a cobweb machine from a movie set company to make that cobweb in the piece because it was done with a kind of glue like a rubber cement and you spray it. And I really love the way the wrinkles in his face and the cobwebs work together. Next. Another interesting piece to me is that I did this in a rectangle in a box, a regular box. And it was about doing it with mirrors, it was called. And so there were mirrors on the sides to reflect Kissinger looking at Mao and Shanghai Shek. And it didn't photograph because it was a rectangle. So I had to rebuild the box and make it a trapezoid so it could be photographed. Next. The subject for this was all the things for continuing education in different classes that were being offered in New York. So you can see the little wooden breakdancer in this one. Next. This was about sudden death on Monday morning and how more people die of heart attacks on Monday than any other day. I never knew that. Who did? So I took a little toy soldier and put a suit on him and painted it. And there he is dead on the street. This is a contest from the year 2000, and it was done in 1980 of the year 2000. And I collaborated with a photographer named John Booty. It won first prize. And there you see the Twin Towers going to heaven. Go figure. Next. Atlantic Records, tribute to Satchmo. I went to the Jazz Museum to try to see if they could give me some of the objects that actually were Louis Armstrong's. And they did in the case that I would actually give them the piece after it was published. And I did, I donated it to the museum. And in the very bottom is a little packet called Swiss Chris, which is a laxative he was fond of giving out to all his friends, kind of in joke. Next. Two covers for Roberta Flack. I put them both here because the one they wanted and that was used was the one on the left with the three pictures that were done by Avedon. I put the one on the right there because I wanted to use that one and leave out that other picture because I thought it had much more mystery and depth and it was a much better piece, but they chose the other. Next. And this is a piece I did to celebrate my divorce, just for myself. And it says, in sickness and in death, till health do us part. And I used our wedding rings. And the New York Times bought it for an article on divorce. Next. This was the end papers from the New York Times Magazine, and it was Paul Child's love poems to Julia. And one of them I remember was, your shapely thighs and your lovely legs can only be equaled by your scrambled eggs. And they sent the piece back so that I would darken the chicken because they said it looked undercooked. Next. Now a little shameless advertising. I also write poetry, and these are two of my pieces, my books, they're chapbooks that are now available on Amazon. Next. And this is from Bantam Books, and this leads us to, next, the end. Thank you.
The first one is, how did you get into collage and assemblage?
Well, my parents were both artists, so I was trained from a very early age. And I rebelled like a lot of kids do, and I tried to become a dancer. I went to Juilliard and I majored in dance. But there was a class of lighting and set design.
Mhm.
And even though I flunked ballet, I did really well in that lighting and set design class. And so that kind of interested me. And then I collected objects for many, many years. And I just would have a collection of things. Like I'd find a piece of lace, and then I'd be eating a chicken, and the vertebrae of the chicken bone would look like one of the pieces of the weaving part of the lace. And I would put that next to the lace, and then I'd put a Victorian picture next to that. And lo and behold, I'd have a little box construction. And so a friend, Eugenia Lewis, a photographer, said, "Hey, you know, these could be covers. These could be published. Can I photograph them?" And I said, yeah. And sure enough, I had a portfolio, and this was 1970. And I took them around, and I got the cover of the New York Times Book Review, and that started my career.
That's wonderful. Now, as a former artist manager for illustrators, it sounds like the majority of your work, you retained copyright to it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Did you do any work for hire?
Mm-hmm. Um, no, I don't.
Good for you. Good for you. Not even for the Times. Oh my God, good for you.
No, no.
Because they are notorious. Okay, so let's see. Um, First question from the audience is, could you clarify the line between collage and decoupage?
Oh, well, decoupage is a collage. It is collage. It's just decoupage because I don't know the actual meaning of decoupage in French, but what it is that it's more of a craft than an art. It's used more for objects, and it's a different technique because after the collage is done on screens or on plates or whatever,
Mhm.
the technique is done, like I said before, with a very fine sandpaper and layers and layers and layers of shellac, which is not the standard collage method.
Ah, okay, thanks. Um, Another question is, since this art form has a long history that's predominantly female, why are Braque and Picasso considered founders? Is
No, good question.
this yet another example of female discrimination?
Yeah, I don't think women were taken very seriously as artists at that time. Um, of course, they were, but I don't know.
Um, we just spoke about your copyright of the work, but How does a collage artist deal with copyright when they're assembling the work?
It's a very good question.
From
When I
everything.
was teaching at Visual Arts, I actually got a lawyer to come into my class.
Mhm.
And I expected her to say, oh, it's 28 years from the life of the artist added to the life of the work, a whole thing, which used to be very complicated rules for copyright.
Mhm.
And she just came in and she said, well, if the artist or if the creator or the owner or the publisher recognizes it, don't use it. That was her simple answer. You have to really change it so much that it's not recognizable, or in the case of me with Time Magazine, they own the right. When they gave it to me to use, they must have settled with the artist who they got the piece from, or else they owned it. And then they were able to give me work
Right.
or photographs that I could then use, which
And
was
your
the case. Yeah, many
contract
magazines did
stated
that.
that, right? Your contract with them stated that they were responsible for all copyright issues for the
That's
material.
right. And I learned my lesson. I was very careful with that one. But I retired just in time because I was kind of squeezed out. I wasn't really on the bandwagon in Photoshop for a long time. A lot of young artists were coming in, very good in Photoshop, and also they were cheaper. So I was not getting as much work. So I went into my fine art.
Okay, so you were not getting as much work because you were not hopping on the Photoshop bandwagon.
Not in the beginning.
Young artists, that's basically what they were growing up with. So it wasn't that they were shifting. You had to shift. What was I mean, did you feel that Photoshop demeaned your artistic process? And so you didn't really think that it
No, oh no, I don't think so. Like I used it as a tool. I think Photoshop is a tool,
yeah.
and I think I've seen some beautiful things done in Photoshop as fine art, but it is a tool,
Mhm.
and I use it like I'd use any other tool at this point. Uh, it's a certain look. I personally still love the feeling of the tactile sense of handling paper. I like the paste. I like. Um, I just I like the old-fashioned way of doing it, and I think artists. When I was teaching that even though a lot of artists had access to Photoshop and were very good, a lot of my students very
Mhm.
good, they should learn hands-on collage.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think.
No argument here. Um, did President Carter ever comment on your time cover?
No, he never did, as far as I know. It's now in the Smithsonian Museum and National Gallery of Art. And I can tell you a funny little story that when I did that piece, it was shown in the Society of Illustrators show of
Mhm.
Time magazine. They had different covers, and mine was shown. And the head of the society asked me to explain it to her, and I was talking about it with her. And all of a sudden, I'm behind glass, and I'm showing her the little thing, and all of a sudden, there's the Chinese fortune cookie with the American flag in it, and a roach crawls out of the fortune cookie behind the glass. So she says, "We've never had a roach problem in the society before." It, I didn't have one. I said, "I don't know where that came from."
They
So just a little funny story. I never worked for them again after that. Well, except for that
Mhm.
neglect of nursing home.
Right. Um, given the historical section that we went through at first,
Mm.
uh, which artist from that part of the presentation would you say you have been influenced by the most?
Well, I think Joseph Cornell, because I worked a lot in box constructions, especially in the beginning. Um, Rauschenberg also,
Mhm.
to a certain extent. Um, Yeah.
Okay. Um, Somebody has asked about the time frame for the commissions for your newspapers and magazines and so on. So, yeah, I would be curious
Today.
what your experience has been, because usually 48 hours is what I'm used to with my artists.
Yeah. Um, the hardest one was the New York Times because I did a lot of work for the New York Times, and
Mhm.
they'd want it sometimes that afternoon, rarely, but at least the next day. And I like to work under pressure. I did my best work under pressure because if I had time, I just let it go. But when I knew I had a deadline, I was really going all guns. So it depends on the piece. I mean, there were certain pieces I did that I'd have a lot of time. The Tokyo Bay Lala part, I had about 6 months to do that. I mean, depends.
Great. Let's see next. What type of paste and glue do you use?
That's a whole other thing. But basically, off the bat, uh, for illustration, I would use rubber cement, paper cement. Now they're making it archival, which is interesting. It's acid free. It never used to be. But
Mhm.
I would use that because it had to be removed. If an editor didn't like what I did, I'd have to take the piece apart. So that's what I used for that kind of work. Now, for fine artwork, again, I use archival glue. Um, there's a paste glue called Yes, and it comes in a jar.
Mhm.
And I find it easy to use. It spreads on. Sometimes don't ever use Elmer's glue. Don't ever use because those the glues tend to change color over time, and they should be acid free.
Do you prefer one technique over the other for illustration?
You mean assemblage or collage?
Hmm. Yes.
Well, I mean, well, or a technique. Well, I don't really understand the question when you say technique.
Well, let's see. Well, hey, it's one of Tony's questions. Do
Oh,
you
oh,
prefer one
okay.
technique over the other for illustration?
Well, maybe she means or fine art or illustration. I don't.
Our own work.
But,
If you
but
forget.
anyway, it's all good. I don't prefer whatever.
Let's see. No, that's not right. We did that. That one we did already. Was the collage with the World Trade Center prior to its destruction, I believe it was.
Yes, that there were several. The one that Alita Adams did where I was there was 2001.
Mhm. What did
No, wait, you said the World Trade Center. I'm
the
sorry,
World Trade Center?
just zoned out for a minute. No,
That's okay.
uh, yeah, it was done before.
What advice would you give to a very young artist?
Work for yourself. Don't work for the end result as far as getting into the gallery or being famous or making money because it's not a money making business. Do it for the sheer pleasure of doing it. That would be my best advice.
Mhm, mhm. Is there any way to get a list of the artists that you spotlighted today? Which, by the way, audience, please note, this is being recorded and you will be able to see all of this again tomorrow on our YouTube channel. But do you go through any of this on your own website, or is
Uh,
your website
my
just
website is only my art.
okay?
It's just my art. But my website, I will say also, and I am selling my fine art through my website.
Mm.
And so, if anybody is interested, go to my website, and I have an area for illustration, but a lot of it is the fine art that I'm
Mhm.
doing in collage and assemblage right now, and past few years. And like I say, it's available and you can get in touch with me through that website.
Well, I must say this was really wonderful. The work that you showed was stupendous, but your work is right up there. It's really amazing. And one of the attendees in the chat box has said, I didn't know it at the time, but I've been looking at your work for years, and it is true. And it is true. It is true.
Thank you.
So I thank you for this. And one of these days, next season maybe, you can come to the club and show more and tell us more in
I'd
person.
love to.
Absolutely.
Absolutely love to. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who attended. I hope you had a great time. The work was magnificent. Again, you can catch this tomorrow on our YouTube channel. So watch it again or share it with friends. And for myself and on behalf of the National Arts Club, have a wonderful evening and good night.